how your company reserves its seat at the table with industry competitors, as well as when you invite people to sit at your table. So when you're bringing people onto your team, and best interface, hiring, firing practices, everything HR. Marina, give us a little introduction, and thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It's a funny shift we just had, because before we went live, we're just joking. It was very loud and rowdy, and then you go into this very professional introduction, and I see myself also sitting a little bit straighter and being a little bit more proper. So to introduce myself very quickly, my name is Marina Byezhanova. I was born in the Soviet Union, grew up in post-Soviet Ukraine, moved to Canada, found myself working in recruitment, hiring by complete pure chance. Nobody wanted to hire me. I had a thick accent. Nobody understood what I was saying. Unpronounceable last name just was not helpful in the job search process. So fell into recruitment, fell in love with recruitment, and then discovered that I'm also an entrepreneur. Turns out, who would have known? Not me. Growing up in the Soviet Union, that wasn't a thing. Started my own hiring business about 10 years ago, pivoted into culture consultancy along the way. And for the last few months have also been working with organizations on their employer branding campaigns and with individuals on their personal brand and more so thought leadership programs as well.
Well, I certainly can't think of a better person to join us at such a timely intersection of the world right now. You know, we're certainly seeing how diversity and inclusion are becoming some of the most important brand pillars of brands. Like, brands are reflecting themselves through their community of employees. And that's a really cool time for that, I think, because we haven't really had that level of employee group control over the company's image and likeness and pushing them into commerce by means of its people. So I really enjoy that community, a democratic approach of the community of the employees within a company, really being a reflection of that corporation. So it's really exciting. I think you're the exact right person to put in this driving seat for this conversation. And so without further ado, let's jump into creating your personal brand. And this is something that in our episode 1 with Kimberly Montoya, we did talk about creating that perfect customer avatar, basically creating that mirror reflection of you as your brand, you know, celebrating what makes you unique. And really the most important thing here is being authentic. So Marina, talk to us about the 101 overview about personal branding, people that are starting out their businesses and they're not sure how to brand themselves, if it's a party of one, maybe 2 employees. Let's start with the baby steps first.
Sure. So step number 1, you have to identify your why. You know, Simon Sinek's onto something here, and it really is the core step number 1. And it's very hard to do, because usually what we do is we come up with something fluffy that justifies why we do what we're doing. We're just coming up with something that justifies it, and that's why I'm doing that. That's the biggest mistake. So when you are looking at your why, it has to be predicated, built on something that's really, really personal, really deep, and something that you almost feel uncomfortable sharing. Those are the most powerful why statements that I've seen. So number 1, because then that will give you purpose and a mission to your organization and what we're doing, right? We're hearing right now a lot, especially with younger hires, younger generations that we're looking to recruit for our businesses. They want to do meaningful work. They want to make an impact. Well, listen, we're not all nonprofits, and we're not all creating, technology that will save the world, right? So then the question is, well, what's the impact? But if you do come up with a why that really is authentic to you and something that has that intersection with something that other people might find meaningful, then you really are onto something. That would be step 1. Then core values, but your core values. And yes, your business core values, there will be a correlation, especially if you're a solopreneur or running a small business. But again, what I see, I do culture assessments of organizations, and what I often see is companies copying out and coming up not with core values, but kind of brand descriptors, if you will, right? We're team-oriented, we're, supportive, we're fun. That's great, but those are brand descriptors that they describe what the experience is like. Patrick Lencioni said, real core values, it's real and authentic when it hurts, it causes you pain, right? If you're ever faced with a situation where, that value is sacrificed, it's unacceptable. Even if you're losing customers, you're losing money, no matter what happens. So core values, that's the next important step, because then you start building your unique value proposition as, potentially a thought leader in your field, because that's what a personal brand should be. You should be a thought leader. And then finally, and I find that this is the most missed step, and that this is still 101. There's a lot more complex and deep stuff, is you have to have a very strong point of view. That's the most important part. You have to believe in something and believe in it very clearly. You can't be playing it safe and just kind of believe a little bit in everything. Now, you don't have to be as expressive about your point of view as, let's say, Gary Vaynerchuk, who a lot of people find is very polarizing because of his communication style. You can be more demure, more introverted, but you have to stand for something. So defining a very clear point of view is also essential. Those steps are 101.
I love the steps you outlined, and obviously that we have a wide audience that are learning in different ways. And so, by the way, I follow that exact same logic and that exact same structure of what's the most important at the core of a brand. Really, one, it's a person, typically a founder, and then two, what you outlined is exactly what I think. But from my standpoint and how I learned how to get to that point, MVV, mission, vision, values. I think that the founding principles of any company should start with a mission and a vision, and also have a very clear values structure about what you will elevate, what you will not elevate, what you will squash down, and kind of being your overall goal of why you're starting a company. Because most people that are starting their own company have already worked for corporate America, or they found things that they did not like or that were adverse to their corporate DNA, if you will, right? So I think that by outlining a very clear mission, a very aspirational set of vision, very here's value will really act as a guiding light to running a company and having a really meaningful core of your company. Separately, brand pillars I think are very important. Things that, again, you want to elevate and speak about, people you want to work with, people that you won't work with. Maybe setting some basic parameters are very important to you, but really don't lose yourself in that whole operation. Because again, as you said, Marina, everyone loves a story. You cannot forget why people even host events or experiences in the first place. And that is that we are collectively where stories from brands or people or passions meet physical manifestations and experiences, right? If stories and experiences are meeting, look at your resume. Your resume is a story. And then what is your experience, right? And how can you speak to opportunity within that story and your experience? You got to really mend those two beautifully, because again, we are industry-wise, we're the intersection of stories and experiences. And when those come together, that's a beautifully produced event or a beautifully produced activation, or that means that you got the job. So collectively, Marina, we are super aligned on what the core being of that core branding element is. But again, my approach is just more, coin phrase thing. That's how I learned it, you know what I mean? And I think we both agree on the same process. And really, again, authenticity. Like, do not BS your customer. And do not be inauthentic to them, because they can see right through that, and that'll actually puncture holes in any story you try to tell moving forward, is by not being authentic.
Absolutely, but then that is predicated on a lot of self-awareness, right? And that's often lacking, because when we say be yourself, we mean I love that person. She is herself. Oh, she's engaging and outgoing and well-spoken and well put together, and very open with what she shares. So often that's what we, use as a replacement. And that's why I'm saying it's very important to distinguish between brand descriptors and core values, right? So for example, in my case, my personal brand descriptor is I'm outspoken. And I'm sure anybody who's watching that knows me even remotely is laughing really hard, because they're like, understatement.
Party is here, I got it.
Very outspoken, but that's not my core value. My core value is censorship is evil. That's my core value. So I believe in being outspoken as an antithesis to being censored, right? And of course, there's a story behind that, Soviet Union, etc. So that's when it becomes powerful, right? And then, for example, I share a lot on social media, I post a lot. I get a lot of nasty comments sometimes, and a lot of people that don't like what I'm saying. I never delete a comment, never block a person, because censorship is evil, right? Even when it hurts. Sometimes it hurts. It's unpleasant. You don't want to see that. And you think, is this damaging to my brand, my corporate brand, right? Because I'm an extension of that. But when a core value is true, you live it no matter what.
That's very, very cool for you to actually share that, which again, like being really true to that experience, I think is really interesting that you brought that up, because right now people are being outspoken, using social media channels. And I agree with you that it's important that people see the really fair representation of what you put out in the universe. And that kind of brings us to this next point about when you do grow and scale outside of your one woman, one man show type thing, how do you scale that branding to follow that and keep it appropriate? And I think that our company is an example of that, because I, like an idiot, named it AK Johnston Group when it was just me 12 years ago. It sounds more like a law firm or something like that. But now that we have 40 people that are evangelizing our brand every day, we have a beautiful reputation. We're with big clients that build Scenic for Disneyland, and we're doing Google and YouTube projects, like all these big corporate things. You think of this dream world. You don't have to lose your branding by diluting it into some corporate juggernaut image. It's kind of why Google keeps doing Google homepage celebratory animations on their search engines, because it's very fun, right? So that could be really an interesting way for you to create this, kind of celebrate your personal brand, but it can grow. You can create playful ways to express yourself through a large corporate brand. And a lot of our clients love that about us. That, again, we are outspoken because I'm outspoken. And of course, my team carries a certain level of humor, and we can wear suits, but we can also wear t-shirts and be just as professionally engaged. It all comes down to figuring out what your tone is and how you want to speak to clients, making sure that client avatar is a reflection of what you're putting out, basically. Now, not every client's going to vibe perfectly with you and your vision, and that's okay, but don't lose yourself because you're trying to market to Google. They don't appreciate that typically, and that's, again, going to be proven as inauthentic to your story. So, Marina, what are your feelings about scaling that one-man band to becoming a full orchestra? Like, what do you think about that?
So listen, my experience was the complete opposite of yours. So when I started my business, my headhunting firm that's called Pronexia, it was Pronexia Inc. Incorporated, Pronexia, that was the name. And so as we were scaling the brand of Pronexia, we realized it's really hard. It's ideally, requires quite a bit of an investment to scale a corporate brand, right? Even on social, to get any type of traction for a business page versus a personal page, it's a completely different ballgame, right? Trying to get media attention when it's a brand story is very hard. And again, costs a lot of money usually, unless something really unique is happening with your organization. When you're a headhunting firm, not a lot of uniqueness is going on. You're one of very many. It's an extremely competitive field. And so even at one point, we hired a PR firm. 10 months, they got us one media mention. Now, mind you, it was a good media mention, but it was one in 10 months and a lot of money, which we didn't have. We grew organically through bootstrapping. Until I started building my personal brand, I started putting myself out there, not because I even realized it was going to bring any business value. I just all of a sudden, I mentioned to you, I was extremely accented. When I moved to Canada, nobody wanted to really listen to what I had to say. As the accent started diminishing and I started gaining confidence, I just wanted to talk and be out there and be heard. And as I started building my personal brand without even realizing, I became intentional about it much later. All of a sudden, I started getting all kinds of media mentions. And then, of course, I mentioned, and then the business is mentioned, right? Because Marina, co-founder of Forbes.com, Inc.com, Success Magazine, Fast Company, Yahoo News, I can go on and on, with a $0 investment. And they were coming to me because I was sharing stories and posting and very active on social media. So I think that for somebody starting out, I think your instincts were on point. I think you were ahead of the curve there, even naming it your name, and you think that makes it less serious. That's perfect. Because at the end of the day, and I think this trend is not going away, people like working with people, buying from people, working for people. The whole appeal of a corporate brand it's just losing its luster a little bit. It's still important. It still brings a lot of value, of course, but it's easier to differentiate yourself. And if you don't have a lot of money to invest, to gain that visibility for your business, to hire, but also to attract clients and to attract media attention, it's easier if even from the get-go, you focus on your personal brand.
So kind of to develop this story a little bit further, I'll just do a quick aside about why I called it AK Johnston Group, is because I had a terrible business partner when I first started my first company. We did not have the same moral, ethical values on how to run a business. And so that was just ended as negatively as it became. And so we parted ways of our company. When we tore that company apart, I decided that I wanted to put my personal signature on every project, because basically we were pumping out work that was not very, very good. Because the jobs that I would handle, I was happy with. The jobs that other people would handle in our company were not reflected of my values and my quality level that I thought we were capable of, because they just weren't good. They just weren't. So when I called the company AK Johnston, it was a reaction. It was a knee-jerk reaction to saying, you know what? Back to basics. I'm gonna dial it in and put my signature on everything. Well, now that I run a company that does 400 events per year, a little more challenging to be at every show, and I don't, but our personal signature, my personal signature, is on every job. I guess by proxy with my name being on everybody's T-shirt, even. But more than that, it's really important to me that everything that this company pushes out, that I've had my hand on in some capacity, maybe more or less than others, that kind of thing. But that was that's actually why it's called AK Johnston. Still, I don't think it's a great name. My bad, but that's a personal opinion that only I can share. So
I disagree. You know what? You just mentioned having your name on people's T-shirts, and I'm like, you know what? I got rejected because of this name, because Byezhanova. When you say Byezhanova, doesn't sound as bad as when you try to read it. There are a lot of consonants, and I'm thinking, that's like a really, rising of the nerd. I put it on people's T-shirts. I'm like, it's the brand name. I see that.
It very much is the brand, which is exciting now that we're actually, press worthy, and we are getting a significant amount of press now. But again, guys, my first few years, I was like, ugh. But again, stick with your brand. The brand can be a reflection and extension of you, and that doesn't have a limit for scale. So that's really important. Now, one easy thing that you guys can do, which is not going to sound easy at all, and it's one thing that I have wanted to do for years, and that is write. I'm not a very good writer because I get too distracted. I get very ADD, ADHD on all the projects that I have started in my company and in general. But I finally actually started, writing. So I wrote my first article, which was very exciting, for BizBash. And I didn't know until it was live how popular it was. To this date, it's the most popular, most read article in the history of BizBash. So I don't know how that happened, but I actually have the data for that. And I was shocked to hear that it was performing about 1,000% more than other articles that had been published by other more experienced persons of the industry. So that was stressful for me to hear that fact, but it actually got us some good press. So just like you were saying, Marina, about how you got press and write-ups within Forbes and all the other beautiful avenues of PR, sometimes you're holding yourself back, people. And if there's anything you learn from the extra time on your hands for COVID, it is write everything down, just dump it all into a notes sheet. And maybe if a beautiful article comes out of it, there's gonna be somebody to publish that. Self-publish it on LinkedIn. Maybe it will start trending and pick up traction. Or maybe you'll just learn how to write your 3rd article, your 8th article. And on that 10th one, you're gonna nail it, and it's gonna get picked up, and it's gonna go wild. So again, Marina, to your point about generating your own PR, put yourselves out there. There's never been so many digital tools, from Instagram to YouTube to LinkedIn to even media outlets. If you just email a media outlet, whether it be Event Marketer or BizBash or anyone really, even Fortune, Forbes, or Inc., they might pick your article up, or at least for digital. There's no harm in sending it out. You got to gauge that yourself, but stop being afraid, get off your butts, and do the things that you said you were going to do, because right now you have more time than ever. And while being creative is more difficult than ever, in my opinion, because being creative right now is very challenging, do it. Just do whatever you can just to do it. Like, go sit in the park, go get a little bit drunk. I don't know what it takes to tap your creativity, but go tap
it after. Drunk writing is not always the best. It seems that in the moment. But just to add to that, first of all, preach. That's just so on point, and just a way to stand out. For example, LinkedIn is more actively used as normal, but most people are just there to consume content. They're not really producing it. Under 1% of people, I think it's 1%, post actively, right? So there's a lot of potential to be seen by journalists as well, and of course prospective clients. And just to add to what you said, Austin, get a ghost editor. I don't believe necessarily in ghost writers. I think you should own your content and your story and your message, but get a ghost editor. If you're not so sure about writing, you can always DM me, and I can refer you to great people in my network. Just get somebody to look it over, make it more appropriate for whatever platform, get that help, and then there's no more excuse.
Exactly. Worst case scenario, get family and friends just to look at it, make sure it's relatable, figure out who your audience is and how to relate to them. Just to talk about your personal brand, the tone that you take in an article doesn't have to be formal and all buttoned up. You could probably guess that I have a lot of candor in things that I write, and I write much more conversationally than most would. That's my style of writing. And there's well-published authors that are in Vanity Fair and other major international publications that have different writing styles from one another. You do not have to be formal or wear a necktie in your article. You just got to be authentic to yourself and your brand story, because that article will be a reflection of you, and you are a reflection of your brand. It should all parlay into one another. If it starts feeling like one is aloof from the next, you are failing at that point, in my opinion. You're only failing if you're not being authentic to your story and you're not creating that baseline where they go, this sounds like something Austin would write. This sounds like you close your eyes and you can hear Austin saying it because I write like that. That's a pretty cool, authentic brand moment. And it's not for everybody, but I didn't write it for everybody. I wrote it for people that I want to connect with, and that's an effective means. So moving on to like a larger concept of HR is that most of you, once you get to that point where you establish that personal brand or that corporate scalable brand that you're in, which could be a beautiful banner for how you run your business, now you got to start expanding. So how do you bring on partners, whether they be an employee or an independent contractor, that is a good reflection of the likeness of that brand? So Marina, do you want to kick us off with, from a Canadian perspective as well, is hiring 1099ers, independent contractors, or should they just hire somebody that they feel is in the likeness of their own brand?
I really don't think there's a big difference between hiring somebody permanently on contract. And that really is just my belief and my experience as well. I think what's really important, and that's the reason it's so important to establish your core values, to know what your why is, to know what your unique value proposition is that those are the pillars that should guide your decision making when you're partnering up with somebody, when you're bringing on contractors, or when you're hiring, or even, when you are accepting clients. Because yes, even in the most competitive fields, and I'm in recruitment, extremely competitive, we can still be selective and we can grow by elimination, not by just accepting everybody. So I think that whether somebody's working for you as a freelancer, we're in the gig economy, that will only grow in prevalence, or you're bringing somebody on payroll, that's really a personal decision and your vision for the organization. Some people are passionate about growing, one employee brand and just having contractors, and that's their passion, extremely successful, run multi-million-dollar businesses. And some people really have the dream and vision of having employees and teams and that internal culture, etc. Neither one is preferable, but what's essential is that in your selection process, you're really using your core values, making sure that you're finding people who are as passionate about your mission as you are, align in that, and also share the same core values. I would say those are the most important things.
I totally agree with you on the, especially from the difference of, and this is the biggest question that we're asking is, should I hire them or should I, just keep independently contracting them? And for me in California, we have a law called AB5, which limits the amount of independent contractors that you're able to hire if you have the same full-time job available on your roster. So that's a challenging legal approach that I'm limited or handicapped by decision. Now, before 2020, before that law came into effect, if you ask the same question, I would say that there is no difference. From an exposure standpoint, any independent contractor in this kind of world, in this kind of job, is gonna have access to the documents, the clients, communications, whatever it might be, as a full-time employee. So what are you gaining or losing? The only thing that you're gaining by having an independent contractor part of your team is that you're not promising the consistency of a job beyond each gig, right? So if you have currently one client that does 4 events per year, you probably want to stick with a 1099er because you're gonna look at that and say, hey, contractor person, I'm gonna pay you $10,000 to help me organize this function. Here's the scope. Are you in or are you not? And they can agree to it on a case-by-case basis. What makes limited sense to me, and there's a lot of agencies that are running in this capacity, is when they have a roster of freelancers that don't actually work for the agency. And I find that very challenging when they go from project to project to project, even if it's not like the same account. It gets to a point where there's a cost utility factor of looking at it and going, how much money am I spending to gig hire this person? And then of course, the bigger conversation comes into actually when you start employing larger people, for me, is benefits. A lot of people would then expect benefits when they obtain full-time employment, versus usually contractors don't usually imply or even ask about benefits because it's pretty well known that the line in the sand is here's money, but no benefits because you're an independent contractor. But from an exposure standpoint, I would just say that it's the same damn thing. I mean, you can go to court for the same problems as a contractor versus an employee. I guess having an employee might protect you a little bit more because all the work that they do at that time in their life should be dedicated to you at that point. That is the only thing I could think of that would be a little bit more clear from a legal standpoint. But again, all my commentary in this section, notice, is about legal and financial, right? It has nothing to do with the relationship because in my opinion, it's interchangeable. Again, same exposure levels, same relationship. The client shouldn't and won't know that they're independent or not. So really make your choice based off of that, and just go find people that are a good reflection of the values, the mission, vision, and values of your company, and supports the pillars and also the, I'm sorry, Marina, what did you say? Not brand pillars. You said the character attributes of your brand?
Brand, yeah.
The brand characteristics that, of course, you're going to bring to market. Because when Sally somewhat comes to market and she says that she's a rep of your company, I would hope that she talks just like you do. Same tone, same demeanor, same professional decorum. Again, make sure those people have a good reflection of how you present yourself, because eventually they'll be evangelizing your brand, selling to new customers, and maintaining those relationships in your ecosystem, right? Anything else to sign off on about that before we go into the next time?
Yeah, also very important, and something I personally learned is ask yourself, are you a really amazing manager? And do you even like it? When I started scaling my business, and I was so eager to get employees and get more employees because it's just exciting. It's also a sign of a successful business, right? Because when somebody says, oh, you have a business, that's great. And by the way, when you're a woman, the follow-up question is, do you have any employees? Because they want to make sure that you're saying business and it's legit. So it's like a question I get all the time. So do you have employees? And they're not saying how much revenue you have, right? You might be a multi-million-dollar services business doing amazing. But if you say I don't have employees, they don't know you're doing well. And so it's just like a vanity metric, right? Is what I realized. The thing is, there's a difference, I believe, between amazing leaders and amazing managers. And if you don't think that you are an amazing manager, and it is a difference, right? As a leader, you can excite people, jazz them up. You can talk to them about your vision. You rally the troops. People go, oh. But then when you're managing people, you're also hand-holding, and you're everybody's emotional lifeline. And you want to make sure that you're documenting every issue, and you're and everything. It's a very different job. And if that's not something you really are sure you're passionate about, I would recommend not to hire people just to fill those vanity metrics that we're driven by. And I'm not being preachy, I'm projecting here, I'm talking completely out from experience. I realize that I am an extremely subpar manager. I pride myself in my leadership skills, but as a manager, I don't enjoy it. I don't think people on the receiving end of my management are enjoying it either. So I wish I'd asked those questions of myself early on in the process of creating a business.
That's a really critical lesson that I'm really happy that you shared, because you're so right. And even in my day, even though I have a tiered management structure in our company, so I don't interface with everybody on every disciplinary action, hiring or firing process, it is still, HR is by far, by a good degree, a gap, the most stressful thing in my life. It's the most unknown thing in this company's ecosystem and world, and creating culture within your workplace is your number one goal. And it's every single day. You have to reinforce that, kind of reteach that. You gotta bring that up every day. So creating that corporate culture or that team culture, that environment, that's really important. And that's the most stressful thing for anybody if you really care. If you don't really care that much, not that stressful, but your team's gonna fall apart pretty soon anyway. And so it's really important, Marina, that you ask that critical question of yourself is, look in the mirror and say, is this the right job for me? Does this hat actually fit? You got to really ask yourself that before you proceed, because it will blow up in your face very quickly. And if you're hiring people for vanity, I would recommend that you don't do it, especially at the time of COVID. No one really has expectations for large companies and ballooned infrastructure, so don't do it. Use this time to be slim, and because publicly it's acceptable to be slim. So keep it that way as long as you can until you realize, I need to duplicate myself, and here's how I'm going to do that, right? So moving forward into hiring, one of the most knee-jerk reactions that I keep seeing from my competitors and friends and allies is this egregious outreach to immediately hire diversity hires, right? Mm-hmm. And really, if you do have employees or manage teams, you should do a cross-section of your company, just slice it in half, and do a really honest analysis for how you're performing currently, 6 months ago to today, and then what you can do and implement to make sure that you have sustainable diversity and inclusion practices in your company, because you really want to fairly cast that net. Now, for two reasons. One, I believe personally, and this has nothing to do with this current subject, I believe that diversity and inclusion is critical for an effective and strong team with good ideas and proper leadership and proper representation, right? That's been a fundamental of how we run the company for 12 years, okay? Now, I've had to educate myself a lot as a white male, from the United States. There's been a huge educational curve here that I want to be very real about. I'm also a member of the LGBTQ crowd, so I guess I have that level of exposure and the appetite for diversity as well. It's just something you gotta be really real about. And I would advise that everybody explore their own personal downfalls about how they come short with diversity and how to fix that. But don't just go out and hire, and because people are literally saying, hey, do you have any Black people to hire? That's an completely inappropriate thing to ask. And that's not going to fix the problem. Just asking and hiring the first person of color that you can get your hands on is almost setting you back. So Marina, what can you give us with insights about this extremely taboo and touchy subject? And I do mean everything I just said with all due respect to every person from every walk of life. But Marina, get us off into this diversity hiring and best practices.
I'm happy to, and I'm very, very comfortable with taboo subjects. As I told you, core values, censorship is evil. So I'm comfortable taking the heat when I overshare what I really think. Look, I've been on the receiving side of bias on multiple occasions. So as I mentioned to you already, as an immigrant, also as a woman in entrepreneurial sectors, and especially as a young woman. I've been, when I started, I'm older now, but when I started entrepreneurship, and a lot of commentary that I received on those underhanded comments. And, very often I've heard, well, but we do have enough diversity. Let's say the group of entrepreneurs that I'm in, like, no, but there are women, we do have diversity. Yes, but what they don't have is inclusion, and also most importantly, belonging. I think those are important things to think about. Right now, we're also fixated on how do we create diversity. We want to look good, and this tokenism hiring is happening, which I find exceptionally off-putting. So number one, when you're saying, I want to create a more diverse team, and if you're genuine, which by the way, I do believe that most people are good-hearted people, genuine, and are not interested. They're the group of people that are actively, racist, sexist, homophobic. It's not the majority of people, okay? However, majority of people, and I would say likely all of us, we do have bias, some kind of bias, some sort of bias we carry, right? So wanting to be aware of that bias, wanting to create a more diverse team is already a great step in the right direction. However, if the following question is, how are you going to make sure that this person coming in feels included and also feels a sense of belonging? And that's already a much deeper subject and conversation. What are we going to do to make it happen? Because it does not happen on its own if a team is already very homogeneous, right? So it's great that you decided to create this, but how are they going to fit in without feeling awkward and that they don't belong, right? For example, if I am included into a group of male entrepreneurs, okay, great. Diversity, I've been brought in, but then all they talk about is, women and I don't know how much I have to censor myself on your show. I will, but things that just make me feel very awkward, right? I'm not included. I don't feel that I belong. Then there's an issue, right? So that's the first step. When you say I want a more diverse team, okay, but what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do then to include those team, make sure those people belong, that we belong? If you don't have an answer to that, or if your answer is, well, no, our team's great, they're gonna fit in, then you haven't really thought this through. Then it's a little bit more of a knee-jerk reaction because of what's happening right now, right? So I would say that would be a good gut check. And then also diversity. I think that, again, it's important, but it's also important not to go too overboard with it, right? I'm invited to speak at a lot of events, panels, etc. And I do get messages from highly overzealous people saying, I saw you were on this panel and there were 5 people and you were the only woman. You should have refused to participate because you don't know. And I said, well, no, actually 2 other women were scheduled. They canceled at the last minute. And then I'm like, why am I justifying? That's another question. And then they say, oh, but do you know whether other minorities were represented on that panel as well? Single parents, members of the LGBTQ community, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm like, well, no, but how am I going to find out? I'm going to start asking. And then we start, when that conversation gets too, heated and too finger pointing and us versus them, what happens is people become defensive. And, there are studies that show that bias training in organizations often backfires and results in more bias. So conversations that we're having right now are important, but I think it's important to acknowledge that we are coming from a good place. We're looking for solutions. We don't need to rush into any type of tokenism. That's unpleasant, and it's happening right now quite a bit. But we also can't hide our heads in the sand, and we need to listen to stories. Again, I'm a big believer in stories, and the more we understand people's reality, that's when we become a little bit more sensitive. So instead of preaching at each other and, how diverse is your team? How diverse is your team? I think it's more important to do self check-ins and just open the ears, at least before we open our minds, and listen to people's stories.
You are so right. All that personal reflection, I think, is really where you can keep yourself honest, because there are things that even we don't check very often. In fact, even though I own our company outright, and again, LGBTQ member myself, we're actually underrepresented in that category. And it's really important that we keep that honest. Now, it's not because I'm not hiring members of that of that community. We just currently have an attrition of that. So it's not a bad thing, but you can even have these funny reflections. You're like, that's weird. You know what I mean? Sometimes things happen by chance. For instance, in my population of 40, one person can sway a percentage quite a bit. If you're a population of only 4 employees, you're going to be underrepresented in certain categories. So don't forget that either. Don't over-process what's happening now and view that as a full failure. I don't want people to be going into this going like, I have to hire Black people. That is not what we're saying. You need to run an honest reflection on how to respect and elevate everybody, every candidate, engage in conversations, self-reflection to bring everybody to the table. And again, for me, it's not just about diversity in our company, it's about also inclusion. It's about fair and equal pay. It's about fair and equal opportunities from before they even get hired to when they're working here. Fair and equal ladder climbing as well too, from male to female, Black to white, you name it. And in fact, like for me, even to check myself in, one of my higher people up here, she's actually one of my persons of color inner circle executive team. She told me this crazy story that's not crazy at all. It's heartbreaking. And that is that before she got married, she had a Hispanic last name and could not get a job interview. So she kept her divorced now last name. And I asked her, I said, didn't you get a divorce 5 years ago? She goes, yeah, but I kept his last name because it was a Caucasian, last name. And she kept it because it was better for her in job interviews. And I said, who the hell would do that to you? But there are many people out there that would and do, just like you were experiencing, Marina, about the bias of getting hired because of your last name or because of your gender. And it's horrifying. And by me asking that question, learning more about this person in my organization, I thought it was an extremely powerful story where, holy crap, I need to be more attentive to this. And I didn't know to be attentive to that until I asked more about it and got her story. So again, being really authentic to yourself is really important. And again, bias exists, and educating yourself about it. Again, for me, it was a lot of turning to people going, why do you feel this way? And understanding more about it, but being really open to that. I could be wrong and I could be the jerk in the room. And that's hard, but you have to really turn that reflection on yourself.
Right, but then you see it's through those stories that you really, right? Because you know how human mind works, through just those overarching messages or overarching statistics. We don't process it, but it's the story of your one employee that tells you she feels forced internally to keep her husband's last name. Boom, yeah. That's with you, right? And you shared that story. Now I remember it, versus just, let's say, us talking in general that there are people who keep the names because that wouldn't have resonated. So I think it's important to also share our employees' stories and people around there, and give that platform. My why is to give a platform and scale the reach of people's voices. To me, that's really important. And I think the more we do that, give a platform for people to share their stories, that's where we're going to see impact, more so than companies forced to put out those statements that have been flooding social media right now, and shaming companies who did not come out with a politically correct statement of the moment. I'm sorry, to me that feels very Soviet Union when I see that happening. I see, for example, the founder of a local company here in Montreal put out the most emotional statement of the century. You would read it, you have to see the comments, people like, wow, you are a true human being. Oh my God. I've been to that organization. They have a big warehouse. They employ a lot of people, a lot of immigrants, predominantly of color. You should see the conditions. It looks like a sweatshop. You would not think that a place like that exists in Canada. I was mortified when I saw it, mortified. But yet you see the statement and people get carried away with statements versus digging a little bit deeper. So I think it's important always, again, to just dig a bit deeper. And again, if you're not, discriminating intentionally, yes, of course, it's important to be more intentional with, with diversity, but you're not discriminating intentionally. good person. It's all good. We don't need to all of a sudden start panicking and, ripping our shirts off and feeling that, we're some flawed human beings, because right now there's so much spotlight on the issue.
Creating culture is not fast, and it's also not a PR campaign, in my opinion. And that's, I think, what we're seeing the difference of, is people trying to work fast and then push it out as a PR message, more so than being authentically, like, really down to the root of things, like in that true embracing of that culture. And that just takes time, everybody. Like, you're not going to force that. You're not going to hire persons of color and fix the problem tomorrow. It'll probably make the problem worse, because it's fundamentally not fixed. So really just invest in your people to create that culture layer, which I think is kind of a wrapping statement of what we're talking about with the diversity piece. Now, of course, you have to be very pointed in certain communication pieces. So we're going to segue this into what I consider the constant, never done, never will be done brain dump of ideas, principles, rules, and regulations of your company. The Employee Handbook, baby. The Employee Handbook should be like the guiding roadmap to how to get around your company and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable to your company. From dress code to first aid policies to equal opportunity hiring, the legal statements you have to do in your region and or country and or whatever, right? What are the rules of working for you? Do you have to wear a tie? Do you have to, what do you need to do? So in my opinion and experience, an Employee Handbook is something that everybody right now, if you have the intention of hiring any one employee in the next 5 years, just start writing it now. Now, I would guess that 80 to 90% of an employee handbook is stealable, meaning you could probably borrow phrases and you can borrow rules from past employers, go online for a deep dive of boilerplate language about sexual harassment policies and workplace policies and what are your policies on clocking in and clocking out and all that kind of stuff. But you really need to have an employee handbook if you're ever going to consider hiring anybody. Now, that's another key difference between a 1099 contractor and a full-time employee. A full-time employee, you should absolutely 100% advise that you have an employee handbook. Whereas if you have contractors, you don't necessarily need an employee handbook. But I promise you, if you hire one employee or have one employee and you don't have an employee handbook, you're off to not a great start. And you should start getting ahead of that by writing an employee handbook. And again, like I said, it's never done. You will always be brain dumping and talking to say, hey, I heard about a lawsuit that happened, or a friend tells you a horror story, or that you didn't know you had to say that you have to be proficient in turning on a computer, or that you need to know how to lift things safely. It's important to have that written down somewhere formally, because that will be your basis for safe and fair and transparent employment. So if an employee works for you, they know that they have to lift 30-pound things often. They know that they will have to be on their feet for more than 10 hours a day. Like all these different outline things that you might say are givens, or, oh, we understood that, or, oh yeah, that was assumed or implied. I'll tell you, when you become an employer, nothing is assumed, nothing is implied, and nothing is expected unless you put it down in writing, made that available to the person, they had a chance to review it, and that they signed that they read all that stuff. So Marina, that was chunky and very threatening. So,
yes. You overwhelmed me.
I know.
So
get out of this serious tone, or do you believe that there is a level of seriousness that this should be treated, that the employee handbook should be sent as a guiding roadmap to how to employ persons within your company? What do you think?
So first of all, I think that the tone needs to reflect your brand tone and your company culture. I think that's what's important. I've seen, and that goes for all of your, legal documentation, is the one that's employee or potential employee facing. Big believer in that. I have seen job seekers accept verbal offers and be very, excited in a job opportunity, to then be slammed with a contract that just did not reflect the company culture from her standpoint, or from, the interview process just didn't seem authentic, and then scared the person off because they didn't expect it. So I think that, of course, you want to protect yourself, and it's very important. And I guarantee you that it's the last thing that most people on this call want to be doing. And as an entrepreneur, I agree, because what do we want to do? We want to do the stuff that we love, right? So in your case, produce awesome, amazing events, and you want to sell and market, right? That's what you want to do. You don't want to be created your, accounting systems and financial systems, and also you don't want to be creating legal documents. And also you said, well, why am I going to be creating an employee handbook if I don't have employees yet, right? That's silly. So here's what I recommend. If you haven't read Cameron Herold's book called Vivid Vision, do it. It was transformational for me. So in his book, in Vivid Vision, what he recommends is sitting down and envisioning what the company of your dreams will look and feel like in 3 years from now. Okay. And then you start envisioning, okay, I walk into my office, there are employees. What does the office look like? Are they wearing suits? Are they wearing some, I don't know, funky uniform? What are they doing? What's going on? This is how you make it a little bit more aspirational, inspiring, and a little bit more likely as an entrepreneur to even considering putting together something like that. That also, of course, afterwards will be supplemented with all of the policies, all of the legal stuff. You're going to have likely an attorney look over, but
Great.
the starting point is first dream. What would you like it to be, right? You want them to be, I don't know, you're not envisioning them lifting those boxes, but not because if you're in this job, you're going to lift boxes. No, what are they lifting? Like promo materials was this really cool event that you dream of doing, right? So when you start from the angle of aspiration and inspiration, you're more likely to create it and do it. But it is very important. And I'll give you a very quick example. So I didn't do a lot of those things in my business. I do them for my clients because I consult them on culture and HR issues, etc. And for us, certain things we had in place, but some things that I felt were beneficial to my employees and perks. I'm like, well, I don't have to write it down. It's a perk. Example, never wrote down a formal vacation policy. Our vacation policy, even as a small business that was, bootstrapping and growing organically, was untracked vacation. Not tracked, untracked sick days, untracked vacation. Nobody even asks where you are, right? So proud of myself, right? I was like, I'm so trending ahead of the curve even here, because in Montreal, it's not really a thing to do that. Maybe there's a couple of companies. I thought that was great. And then I got massive heat from one of my employees who felt that it was unfair that there was no written policy. She wanted her vacation to be tracked because she felt it was unfair that she was only taking these many days, but somebody else was taking that many days. And she really took offense to the fact that it was not written, even though we talked about it a lot. So I agree with you very deeply. You better write all those things down to prevent any misunderstandings or grievances after the fact, even on things that you think this is a benefit to you. This is amazing. You must be so excited. You never know.
You are totally right with that. I think that it's interesting to think that, we as the employer, and in fact, one of my famous statements, which is so naive when I first started the company, was I was always telling people that I wanted to be fair. And I wanted to be, it was most important to be fair. But fair is a subjective gray area that you've offered somebody. And what they think is fair versus what you think is fair is aligned. I know that sounds very negative to say that, but what people think is fair on this end and what you think is fair on this end, but you guys both have different perspectives, or you're coming at it from an owner versus employee side, you're never going to align. So to put it in writing, I think is so powerful. Now, the inspirational, aspirational goal setting approach, I think, is extremely good advice because it allows you to have a nice, clear, optimistic vision to framework out your ideal organization. And then you've got to get real from an attorney's perspective about really understanding, okay, what do I need to actually enforce this? What do I need to be held accountable? Because I always ask my team too, it's like, hey, especially about negative conversations, I always say, hold me accountable if I'm being unfair, but did we not discuss X, Y, and Z? Was the expectation not that you'd produce A, B, and C, right? By having a framework out there that holds everybody accountable, people can't say that they feel slighted. For instance, I had a similar story with somebody here because we have a tracked policy on late vacation and also sick pay. And in California, you actually have to post a poster and you have to actually put in a contract of how many sick and vacation days that you're willing to offer, right? So for us, it's a little bit clearer because we have to do it. But then more than that, we track it. So this person said, well, I've been doing all this overtime on salary. And I said, well, yeah, but that's why you've been taking more days off. Turns out the person had been doing about 5 days of overtime and had taken about 14 days of extra vacation, about 5 extra days of sick. We were able to say, hey, look, I don't want to have a fight with you about this, but these are the facts. And by documenting everything, and that's something we're going to make a later point about, but we'll go into it now, document everything in a timely manner when it comes to managing people. If you don't document things fresh in your mind, fresh in witnesses' minds, fresh in everybody's perspectives of what happened, you can't even fairly audit yourself because I've made mistakes.
Right.
I've done wrong by people before. And by having an open dialogue, keeping accountable, and by really being honest with yourself, again, cross-sectioning your own faults, that's pretty fair, But you got to have at least a framework of that. Like, here's all the rules. I've read them. Now you got to read them. And now if you have any questions about this, or if I violate these policies, let's then have a conversation about it. And also too, talking about the awkward elephant in the room. If things ever get to a legal standpoint, whether you got to defend yourself, having that framework written in writing is the only protection you're going to have from it sliding in your favor or in the employee's or person's favor. I don't want to call out employees, because I believe there's a lot of employers that absolutely can do better, and employees owe it to be held accountable. Just like you were saying about the sweatshop thing that you walked into, that's horrifying. Like, that's absolutely horrifying. So I wish that there was an audit system to kind of unplug those people from our worlds, but you can't. So just creating a fair ecosystem where it's written down, and let them choose if it's fair or not, or let them negotiate a contract or a counter offer back to you, but give them all the facts. Give them everything up front. Here's the employee manual. If this stuff, let me know it can work. Anything else on that point, Marina, to wrap the employee manual section?
The exciting section. No, again, just to say, it has to really reflect your culture. The best employee handbooks I've seen, they do just that. I've seen some that are just very heavily image based, right, or like kind of cartoon based, versus some that are, of course, reflecting company culture, are very legal jargon heavy. There's not one is not better than the other. What's best is for it to be really, again, authentic. We talk about authenticity of branding, to be authentic to your employer brand as well. That I believe is important.
You're exactly right, and that's just so important that you remain authentic. Don't scare everybody with all the rules and regulations, but they do have to be written down somewhere, and they have to be acknowledged. I know Heather Reed in our comments here is saying that it should be signed upon their first day of employment and probably re-signed annually. I would absolutely vouch for that being completely valid. And the annual thing, to Heather's point, even if you haven't made updates, have them sign it on January 1st every year. You just collect new signatures on all the employee documents. And separately, if you update language in any contract that you have, obviously have your entire employment body re-sign those contracts, which leads us to another fun little legal agreement called an NDA, a non-circumvention, a non-solicitation, and or a non-competition agreement, which are very hard to enforce, period. And everyone should have one. You should have boilerplate language for that. For, again, non-competition means that somebody can't really take your client. They can't leave you, defect, start their own company. Non-circumvention means that they currently work for you and they're going to hit up your client on the side and try to get a side deal going. And of course, a non-disclosure just protects the company's or the client's trade secrets too. For us, we work for Disneyland a lot. We build Disneyland scenic and rides and shows and that kind of thing. I have a massive, like 200-page NDA with Disney. In fact, I can do anything I want with any Disney character or intellectual property in my building. But as soon as I share that, it is all bets off, and Disney will come a knocking if we start sharing that. Now, that's not to call out Disney. It's fair protection. They're an intellectual property-based company. They should protect that. But NDAs, and Marina, I know we talked about this just before we hopped on this call, they're very hard and very expensive to enforce. So just know that that NDA is really to protect your client's intellectual property. Doesn't really offer you a lot of peace of mind. In fact, non-competition in California is very hard to pursue. So if I have an employee that I groom, let them know about all the trade secrets that I have here in my business, and they go and start a competing business, there's very limited amount of recourse that I can do. I can pursue them. I can sue them all I want. It sounds very scary. Puff up your chest a little bit, whatever. But it's not necessarily going to do anything. You're still going to lose the client. You're still going to look like a jerk, possibly publicly. So you got to really walk that narrow line of an NDA. Are you willing to enforce it? But you absolutely should have it in place. Marina, what do you think about the NDA, non-compete, non-circumvent? What are your feelings?
I absolutely agree with you. Yes, I have them in all of my employee contracts. Yes, I know that they're not as enforceable because, usually the system, it tends to get sides with employees just because of the belief that the person has to have, a fair ability to earn a wage, right? And if somebody's experience is in a specific industry, well, likely they will be in that industry, right? I think that where I've seen companies take the wrong approach is, look, I had one client, for example, they were looking for a sales rep that comes from the exact same industry, from a competitor with a book of business. Okay, so that's what they want. Fine. And then they have an NDA, non-solicitation, non-competition, on everything for the person to sign, states that she will lose all rights to ever, access her business should she go somewhere else. if we're talking about fairness, it doesn't sound quite fair. I see where they're coming from, but and
Right.
she said, well, what if they fire me in a month? What if they're only bringing me on to get the list of clients and their names and their phone numbers? Maybe they're just buying a mini database. I don't know that, right? Because they specifically said we want somebody who's going to come with a book of business, but then leave without it, right? So there is a balance. Yeah, of course, if you're hiring somebody for business development and sales, you want them to have contacts, right? Not only with clients, but suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. But then if you lose it the moment you come in, but we could let you go, right? You're balancing, it's a bit of a juggling act. Again, goes with your culture, goes how you want to be perceived as an employer. But the things are important to have because you're still communicating a message. You're a business and you're protecting yourself from the legal standpoint. So I believe it's important, but again, everything needs to be done with company culture and your brand as an employer in mind.
I am right there with you on that one. I think it all comes back to that, the authenticity and your storytelling and creating culture. Again, culture cannot be forced, culture cannot be fabricated, and culture is not a free snack room at a really cool employer's, break area. And a lot of people kind of got confused with the open office floor plan and free snacks became replacement for culture. And I think people are really seeing through that now, especially as we're working from home. And it's very hard to have a team and community of people, and you certainly cannot force that now. It's harder than ever to force that. So I think that's really important. And that's kind of one of my wrapping points, which I think, Marina, that's a great place to kind of wrap up, because I think we've really touched on what we wanted to establish here, was that creation, reinforcement, and protection of healthy, diverse, and awesome, weird, cool, loud people in your organization, because that is what's going to make just a really beautiful corporate culture that your clients will want to work with. So Marina, give us your final thought, your final wrap up here, and we will sign off for the week. What are your thoughts?
I am allergic to hearing we hire on fit. Because I know that hiring on fit usually doesn't mean what it should mean. It's usually, and the clients say, yeah, I like this person, but I wouldn't go for beers with him. And I don't think work needs to be about beers, right? I think that instead of saying, I want somebody who will fit in, although I mentioned how crucially important the alignment of core values is and having that shared pattern for mission and the why. But I think instead of looking at hiring somebody who's going to fit in, look for somebody who's going to add on to the culture that you're building. And I think that's also when you become a little bit more open without even realizing to diversity, not only diversity in color and diversity in gender, diversity of thought, diversity of opinion. They're all different layers of diversity. So instead of will this person fit in, let's stop trying to really fit in, and just sit down and fit in. It's okay also to stand out as long as the person's adding on.
Absolutely. I could not embrace that more. We have a team of really weird people here, and I always like to give them a seat at the table when it comes down to ideation, because some people you'll realize, oh my gosh, they're a huge gaming person, or they love football, that kind of thing, and they might have the best idea if you give them a seat at the table. So just give your people a chance, tap into diverse mindsets, different perspectives, avenues, backstories, and you're going to find a really, really cool group, and you'll be an unstoppable brand yourself, with that culmination of ideas and execution, and just be a badass. Just keep going in life. So with that, Marina, I want to thank you so much for your candor to our viewers, and just for joining me today. And we will see you guys next week on the next installment of our lovely Creative Commerce program. See you guys soon, and thanks again, Marina.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Bye.